Okay, we are looking at Revelation chapter 17 this evening. Revelation chapter 17, and I know this is big rocket science, but I think you can follow it. It follows right after Revelation chapter 16. And in Revelation chapter 16, we found out last week, chapter 16 and verse 19, we read that the great city split into three parts. Does anybody remember what I think is probably the great city? What is that referring to? We're talking about Jerusalem. But then, it's like the first part of verse 19 refers to Jerusalem. Then it talks about the second part of verse 19 says, and the cities of the nations. That's not talking about Jerusalem. That's talking about multiple cities all around the world. And then we get to the third part of verse 19, and it says, God remembered Babylon the Great. Now, I don't think that Babylon the Great is Jerusalem, and I don't think that Babylon the Great is just the cities of the nations. We're talking about a third entity here, Babylon the Great. God remembered Babylon the Great and gave her the cup filled with the wine of the fury of his wrath. And that is in verse 19, and it's just kind of as an introduction, and then all of chapter 17 is the explanation of that verse. Okay? It's the explanation of God's wrath on a wicked city called Babylon. But before we get there, let's have a word of prayer together. Lord, we thank you for your word. We ask you that you will help us to understand it and to apply it to our lives and to be aware of your purposes for our lives and for the world as a whole. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So I want to read to you at this point Revelation chapter 17, and I'm going to start by reading the first 7 verses, because the first 7 verses introduce us to what what John saw, basically. And then verse 8 to 18 gives us an explanation of what John saw. Verses 8 to 18 is kind of a commentary on the first 7 verses. So I'm just going to start by reading the first 7 verses, and then we'll read the rest later. One of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came and said to me, "Come, I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute who sits by many waters. With her, the kings of the earth committed adultery, and the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. Then the angel carried me away in the spirit into a wilderness, and there I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was dressed in purple and scarlet and was glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. She held a golden cup in her hand filled with abominable things in the filth of her adulteries. The name written on her forehead was a mystery: Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of the abominations of the earth. I saw that the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, the blood of those who bore testimony to Jesus. When I saw her, I was greatly astonished. And then in verse 7 it says, then the angel said to me, why are you astonished? and he explains the mystery. But let's go just with what we have so far in the first 7 verses. So the angel gives an invitation to John in verses 1 and 2. John describes the setting. In chapters 15 and 16, we saw the introduction and the pouring out of the 7 bowls of God's wrath. And there were 7 angels that poured out the 7 bowls of God's wrath. Now we have one of those angels, and we're not told exactly which one, but I have a sneaking suspicion because we're fulfilling what is said in verse 19, and verse 19 is within the 7th bowl. I have a sneaking suspicion that the angel was the one who poured out the 7th bowl. Okay? It doesn't specifically say that, but that's my suspicion. So one of the 7 angels who had the 7 bowls came, and this angel spoke to John. And John quotes the angel's invitation in the second part of verse 1. He says, "Come." The angel says, "Come. I will show you the punishment of the great prostitute." Now this great prostitute is described as the one who sits by many waters. Now, I'll give you a hint. Never be satisfied when Tim tells you to only read the first 7 verses. Read the whole chapter. Because if you want to understand what many waters are, you have to look to verse 15. And we'll dig into it a little bit deeper later. But verse 15 says, "Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages." Now I want you to understand that when somebody sits on something, this picture of sitting on something or by something is a picture of ruling. Okay? It's a picture of having authority over. So this woman or this prostitute that sits on or by many waters is a person, a female person, who is, or portrayed as a female person, who is in control of or who has rulership over many people, multitudes, nations, and languages. So this is a powerful person. But even as I say person is the concept of the personality of this prostitute is inaccurate, because if you read verse 18, the woman is not actually a person. The woman you saw is a city. So there is going to be a city that is going to rule over many nations, peoples, and languages. Okay? So that's what we're talking about. This prostitute is not actually a person. This prostitute is a city. Now, keep that on the sticky side of your mind as we continue to go through. This city or this prostitute is the one whom with whom the kings of the earth commit adultery. In other words, the rulers of the earth have intimate relationships with this city. Okay? They're constantly having intimate relationships. And the inhabitants of the earth were intoxicated with the wine of her adulteries. This city is the center of activity. It has many people, it rules over many people, and it has many rulers and authorities from all the world coming to it and from it, and having relationship with it, and it has a morally defiling impact on the whole world. That's this city, this prostitute. And Rick, would you mind closing the door for me, please? Thank you. And so then we get to verse 3. The angel carried me in the spirit into a wilderness. And in this wilderness, he sees a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. And I hope that this sounds familiar to somebody, because we've heard about this scarlet beast before. We heard about the scarlet beast in chapter 12 and verse 3. You can turn back there if you want to. By the way, never read the book of Revelation just one chapter and forgetting all the rest. Always read the book of Revelation trying to understand the flow of it and trying to match the symbols and the pictures together so that you'll understand it better. Revelation chapter 12, and starting with verse 3. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns on its head. Now flip back to chapter 17 and verse 3 again. There I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. What color is scarlet? Red, right? That was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. We're talking about the same beast. Who was the beast in chapter 12? It was the devil. It was Satan. So we're starting to put this picture together. There is a city that is going to be huge. It's going to have many people, nations, and languages in it. It's going to be a humongous city, and this humongous city is going to have an evil influence on the kings of the world, and this humongous city that has a humongous influence on the rest of the world is going to have an influence for evil and not for good, and then this city is going to be ruling under the influence of this scarlet beast, this satanic beast.
Does that sound like Russia?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I have a problem. I'll tell you, there are many, many interpretations that people have come up with. I'll tell you frankly, right at the top, that some people don't pay attention to verse 18, and they don't think that the prostitute is a city. They think the prostitute is a church. And they think that the prostitute is the Catholic Church. But I have this problem. The Catholic Church is not a city. Now, the Catholic Church does have its headquarters in Vatican City, but I'm not sure if it connects that way. It just doesn't seem to fit. But I will share with you in just a little while what I think possibly does fit, okay? So back to verse 3. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast. The beast was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. This woman was dressed, and we have to think about this, she was dressed in 2 colors, purple and scarlet. Purple was the color of royalty, and scarlet was the color of great wealth. So you mix all this influence of a great city that has kings and nations coming in and out of it all the time, and having an evil influence on the world, and at the same time, this city has great wealth and has royalty connected to it, and then you're getting the picture that he's trying to paint. Not only is this woman dressed in purple and scarlet, this woman is glittering with gold, precious stones, and pearls. That's also more expressions, more visual pictures of great wealth and royalty. And then the woman held a golden cup in her hand, and the cup was filled with abominations. In other words, it's the evil wickedness of the things that were happening in that city. It was filled with the filth of her adulteries. And this woman had a name on her forehead, and the name is a mystery. And I would like to suggest to you that the mystery is a mystery because the name is symbolic and not literal. Okay? The name is Babylon the Great. And some Bible translators say we should take this literally, and that in the Bible you see all kinds of evil things that have happened in Babylon. Remember the days of King Daniel, or not King Daniel, of Daniel, when he was under King Nebuchadnezzar, and that was all done in Babylon, and the Babylonian captivity of the Israelites. And some people believe that there will be another rise of Babylon again in the last days. In fact, some people believe it so strongly that they found the palace that, it wasn't the Shah of Iran, it was the Ayatollah Khomeini who came after him. There was a palace that he built in Iran, and they thought that this was the evidence that Babylon was going to be a great city in the end time. But it never materialized. Okay? So I warn you, watch out for preachers who say this has to be that, because they might be wrong. Prophecy is not a easy this is that thing. Prophecy is a picture of what is going to happen, but we're not always sure how it's going to exactly come out. I give you one example. Some people are saying that these peace talks that President Trump has been active in the Middle East are a sign of the end times. I think they're important for us to watch, but if they are literally the end time peace talks, you know what that makes President Trump? The Antichrist. And I'm not willing to go there. Why? Because I have an uncle who was offered to be paid to preach at a church about 50 years ago. He was offered to be paid a series of messages in that church if he would preach that Mussolini, the Italian leader, was the Antichrist. And he said, I don't know that, so I won't preach that. And guess what? Mussolini wasn't the Antichrist. And for these people that are saying Trump is the Antichrist, I'm sorry, I can't go there. I'm not going to preach that. So back to this text, the woman had a name written on her forehead, and the name is a mystery, Babylon the Great. But the reason that it's called Babylon the Great is because of the evil things that happened in Babylon in history, and it's a picture, it's a metaphor for the evil things that will happen in that great city that is yet future. And Babylon the Great is known as the mother of prostitutes. That means they're unfaithful. And the abominations of the earth. That means they desecrate, they mess up, they put evilness into the peoples of the earth. And I want you to notice what it says near the end of verse, or beginning of verse 6, I think it is, the woman was drunk with the blood of God's holy people, of those who bore testimony to Jesus. In other words, this was a city where Christians were persecuted and tortured and died for their faith. Okay? Verse 6b, when I saw her, I was greatly astonished. So this is John expressing his astonishment at what he saw. This is a picture, and now we're going to get, from this picture, we're going to get an explanation of what the picture means. And always read the whole text, because let's not be the ones who speculate what the picture means. If our speculation is different than what the Bible says it means, then we're wrong. Okay? So let's continue to read verse 7. Then the angel said to me, "Why are you astonished? I will explain to you the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides, which has 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast which you saw once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss, and go to its destruction. The inhabitants of the earth, whose names have not been written in the book of life from the creation of the world, will be astonished when they see the beast, because it once was, now is not, and yet will come. This calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 hills on which the woman sits. They are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. But when he does come, he must remain only for a little while. The beast who once was and now is not is an 8th king. He belongs to the 7 and is going to his destruction. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. They will wage war against the Lamb, but the Lamb will triumph over them, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. Then the angel said to me, the waters you saw where the prostitute sits are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. The beast and the 10 horns you saw will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin and leave her naked. They will eat her flesh and burn her with fire. For God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose by agreeing to hand over to the beast their royal authority until God's words are fulfilled. The woman you saw is the great city that rules over the kings of the earth. Now you try to explain that. Even the explanation is challenging, right? Well, let's try to work at it one part at a time. John was astonished at what he saw, this prostitute. And then the angel, in the second part of verse 7, offers to explain what this is all about. The first thing he says, that the mystery of the woman and of the beast she rides is that this beast has 7 heads and 10 horns. What are the 7 heads? Do you remember what it says? The 7 heads are 7 hills. Now, I don't know if you've ever done this, but if I talk to you about a characteristic of geography, would you be able to match it with a city? If I talk to you about the Great Salt Lake in Utah, what city are you going to identify it with? Salt Lake City, right? If I talk about the city that has a movie about it that's all about blizzards, what city do you talk about? Fargo, North Dakota. Right? There's a big movie called Fargo. And if you talk about the 7 hills, we don't necessarily know it because we're North American. But in John's day, it was well known that the city with 7 hills was Rome. That, you know, that's just as plain as Salt Lake City is by the Salt Lake. The city with 7 hills is Rome. And that's why some people believe that it's the Roman Catholic Church. I don't think this gives us the merit to say that. I think what this text is saying is that there will be some kind of revival or renewal of the importance of Rome in the future, and Rome will have an influence on the whole world that it doesn't have right now. Yes?
Well, can't you say that we are still, I mean, Daniel points to this, is that we're still under the Roman system. So Rome was never really...
It's a lot weaker now, but we still have the residue of that system.
The political ideals and the military ideals are still kind of under that.
There is a truth there,
influence.
but I don't think it's as vibrantly influencing us as this text suggests that it will in the future.
And Rome has the wealth also.
Okay?
If you think of the fullness of the influence, you know, you've got, you know, from the time of Caesar, which was John's time,
Yeah.
you know, you do have that political and military influence, but now, like we talked about the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
we've got the religious influence,
Yeah.
you know, that's worldwide. You know, is it really a city? You know, so much, or
Okay.
could it be, because Babylon falls under this too, it's just a world system.
It's a system, but it specifically talks about it being a city, and I tend towards thinking that when we talk about it like just being the Catholic Church, we're kind of narrowing it down too much.
It's religion.
It's well, even the idea, there's nothing about religion here.
Well, and the influence, I'm thinking of the influence.
Okay, you're thinking about the influence, but the city of Rome itself is that which it is talking about. It's not the religious influence that everybody thinks of. I'm trying to challenge that a little bit.
Well, I was just going on part of the many waters, the multitudes, and all the influence of the...
Yeah, the city is having this influence on the world, but it's not necessarily the church, because the church is not even technically part of Rome. It has its own rulership and stuff like that. Okay, so we're getting into it. It's not easy at all, but there's an explanation in verse 8 about the beast itself. And this beast is an interesting character because it was seen, because it once was, and then it says it now is not, and it says it yet will come out of the abyss. And we've already read a passage that told us about somebody coming out of the abyss. Who was that?
Yeah.
That was the devil comes out of the abyss. So this beast is the devil who is thrown into the abyss, and when the devil was seen and then not seen and then seen again because he comes out of the abyss, this is the devil's influence under the mighty hand of God. God is in total control, and when God says, okay, devil, you sit down in the abyss for a while, then it seems to the world as if he is not. But then he comes out of the abyss only to go back to everlasting punishment. So this statement that he once was, now is not, and yet will come up out of the abyss and go to his destruction is said several times throughout this chapter. And the inhabitants of the earth, and notice which ones, the ones whose names are not written in the book of life. Why? Because the ones whose names have been written in the book of life aren't there. Okay? They will be astonished when they see the beast, and then it says it again, who once was, now is not, and yet will come. And then he goes on in verses 9 and 10 to explain the 7 heads. The 7 heads are 7 hills, and the woman sits on them. They are 7 kings. 5 are the past. They have fallen. And if you go back to Daniel, there are 5 empires, human empires that have fallen. And one is, and the other is yet to come. What was the one that existed during John's time? It was Rome. And I think, and I might be wrong, I could be corrected, but I think that the power that Rome had in John's time is going to be revived in the future. I don't know how, I don't know when, but that's how I understand it. Then another explanation of the beast is in verse 11. The beast is the one who was and now is not, and is an 8th king. So it talks about the 7 kings, and then he says there's one coming after those 7 kings, but that king is part of those 7 kings. In other words, he has an influence, he has a connection on those 7 kings. Then he talks in verses 12 to 14 about the 10 horns. Now remember that in the symbolism that John is using, these 10 horns are horns of an animal which were the symbol of an animal's power or strength. And the 10 horns were 10 kings. So there's a whole lot of political stuff that's going to happen in the end time that I would suggest to you that we have not yet seen. These 10 horns are 10 kings, and they have not yet received the kingdom, at least not when John is writing, or in the time period that John is writing about. But he says they have not yet received the kingdom, but they will receive authority as kings. And I don't think it's literally for an hour, but I think an hour is used to symbolize a very short time. It could be a number of days or weeks, maybe even a year, but it's not a very long time at all. Unless you think that Pastor Tim is preaching for an hour, then it feels like a long time. So they will receive authority as kings for 1 hour, but when they receive this authority as kings, what will their authority ultimately be used for? Their authority will be used to reign along with the beast, but ultimately they will have one purpose, and that is to give their authority to the beast. Remember that we talked about the Antichrist being a ruler of the whole world? I think that this is all connected to that, and that there will be 10 kings who have an extremely great amount of power, and when all of those 10 kings give all of their authority to one person, that's how you get a one world government. That's how you get a one world ruler. And notice what it says. They will wage war against the Lamb, and the Lamb is Jesus. But even though they wage war against the Lamb, they will not triumph, or the Lamb will triumph over them, and his followers will be with him. So it seems like at the end, this is a picture of Jesus coming back from heaven after the saints are gone to heaven. Jesus comes back from heaven, and his followers are with him, and they wage war against this evil, and the Lamb prevails. He triumphs. And when we get to chapter 19, they're going to celebrate the victory of the Lamb over all these evil powers. Then we get back to verse 15 that I mentioned before. The waters are peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. So if I'm understanding this correctly, there will be 10 major leaders in the world. And these 10 major leaders will want to give all of their authority to one place. And if I'm understanding it correctly, that one place will be Rome, and the one person who will be leading over Rome will be the devil himself. If I'm understanding it correctly, that's what's going on. And the devil will wage war against the Lamb, Jesus, and Jesus will win, and his followers will be with him. And then he goes back and explains that the waters are the people, and the beasts and the 10 horns will hate the prostitute. That's interesting. The very city where they get their power, they will hate. They will not care about the welfare of the city. They will want to destroy it. The beast and the 10 horns will hate the prostitute. They will bring her to ruin. They will leave her naked, and they will eat her flesh, and they will burn her with fire. So the city of Rome is going to get extremely powerful and extremely wealthy, and then all of that's going to go to nothing very quickly. If I'm understanding this correctly, and somebody can reinterpret it, and I might be mistaken. I understand that. So God has put it into their hearts to accomplish his purpose, and they do this by handing her over to the beast, and they will do this until God's words are fulfilled. And again, verse 18, the woman you saw is the great city. It's Babylon, but because of the hint about the 7 hills, I think Babylon is a symbol for Rome. In fact, there is a coin that was published, or that was printed during the time of John writing this book of Revelation, and the coin has a picture of 7 hills and a woman sitting on those 7 hills, and the coin is called R-O-M-A, Roma. So, there are two things that I think are happening here. First, I think that John is being a little bit subversive. And he is saying that the Rome of his day, the leadership in Rome in his time, is satanic. But he's saying it in a way that the leaders wouldn't be able to understand it. But at the same time, he's prophesying that there will come a resurgence of Rome, and that leadership will be in the end time. That's how I understand the punishment of the great prostitute. Then we get to the lament over the fall of Babylon, or the fall of Rome, and we'll touch that next week. The reason I want to go back to something that Mike mentioned, the reason many people talk about the church, and specifically the Roman Catholic Church, is because there are pictures in the Bible where the church is called the bride. And so they assume that because this city is called the Prostitute, that it's not really a city, it's actually the Church of Rome, which is the Catholic Church. I don't agree with that interpretation. I think that if you look honestly at verse 18, it's the city of Rome and not the Church of Rome that's in focus here. It's not a religious system, it's a city that's going to be addressed. Okay? Could you turn it off for me, please? Thank you very much, and from this point on, I'll give you some chance to have some questions.